The All-22 film is in, and the reviews are even more unkind to Kenny Pickett than I thought they would be. We'll talk about that and all our Week 8 grades in the Steelers' loss to the Eagles here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Steelers, your daily Pittsburgh Steelers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, welcome to the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter, bringing you your daily dose of all things in the Pittsburgh Steelers. As always, you can find this show on Apple, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Odyssey, and YouTube. If you're watching this video on YouTube, hit the like button of this video if you enjoyed. Hit the subscribe button on our YouTube channel to get all of our daily Monday through Friday episodes, as well as our bonus content. We thank you for making the Locked On Steelers podcast your first listen every day. Today's episode is brought to you by PrizePicks. PrizePicks, of course, the daily fantasy game where it's simple as this. You pick 2 to 5 players that you think you have a fantasy beat on, and if they score more or less than their PrizePicks projection, you win up to 10 times your money on any injury, and it literally can take less than 60 seconds to just enter. It's that easy. So we love PrizePicks. You will too. First-time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with promo code LOCKEDON. That's LOCKEDON, locked on at prizepicks.com. Now, I said during my initial review of the game when I watched it again afterwards and then, processed everything. And I was like, I didn't think Kenny played his best game, but, maybe they're putting too much on him. But let me tell you, and I want to stress this point with the All-22 views. I am not allowed to put All-22 footage on this channel. It's against our company policy, just what I've been given. So I'm not allowed to do it here. So don't ask me to put it on this YouTube channel because otherwise I'll get in trouble. But let me tell you, I didn't see it, and I didn't retweeted and tweeted a few of them, and it's bad. And I'm talking specifically about Kenny Pickett. I went into that game thinking, I come out of that game thinking, I can't see the whole field because that's just how TV broadcasts work. But there were some plays that I thought there were guys open, and I'm like, he could have got it there, but you know what? Maybe, he's thinking the game too fast. Oh, boy. There's some plays that there was a play where Kenny Pickett overthrew Deontay Johnson down the sideline. It was one-on-one coverage. And the overthrow wasn't bad itself in the targets. It's you know what? That was just really good coverage and they have really good cornerbacks. Let's just live to fight another down. But if he looks to his right just a little bit down the middle, the Eagles are running cover 2, which means the middle of the field is open. Steven Sims runs right to it and is looking back at him the whole way. And Kenny Pickett, all he had to do was just throw it. And he walks into the end zone. I tell you, and some people were trying to say, the safety was, about 8-10 yards away. He would have gotten no, not if he throws a rope, not if he throws it right to Sims. I see NFL quarterbacks make that throw every single day. It was rough. There was another time on Pat Freiermuth's pass where he missed Pat Freiermuth over the middle on a 3rd down, and it almost got intercepted. Whereas the miss to Freiermuth was kind of rough, but it's all right, he missed a throw. At least his brain was in the right place. It turns out it wasn't. Deontay Johnson ran a crossing route, and the Eagles just left him alone. They didn't even look at him. He was literally just, he could have done jumping jacks, caught the ball, done a dance, and then sprinted for a first down on a 3rd down. And he would have sprinted for more than a first down. The entire sideline was given up by the Eagles. The more and more I looked at it, I'm like, man, the Eagles defense, I think in that game, they were able to win with a lot of the things the Steelers have won in their best years as defense over the past couple seasons, where their secondary played really well. Their defensive front brought pressure when needed to be, but when they made mistakes, the other quarterback didn't capitalize on it. And part of it's because they were doing so many other things right. But let me tell you this, it continues to be this. When you go back and you watch the All-22 tape of the Steelers and you're looking at play breakdowns and everyone, as soon as the game's over, everyone's saying, these are terrible play calls and there's just nobody open. And how is Matt Canada have a job? And I'm like, look, again, I think Matt Canada may be at fault for not sitting down with these guys enough and drilling it through their heads in film sessions. Like, hey, guys, this is what you need to do. Maybe that's where you criticize Matt Canada, but the passing concepts, the people who are telling you that no one's open, I vehemently disagree with them because there's guys open, short, long, intermediate, middle, left sideline, right sideline, and some of them are tough finds. Like some of them are tough. Like, hey, you know what? He would have had to go to his third progression, and maybe he stepped up in the pocket a little differently. Okay, maybe. But there's plenty of them that like, no, like that was your second read, or that should have been your second look. Like pre-snap, these are the route concepts that you know are coming. These are the things that you got to look at. This is a problem for Kenny Pickett. And now it becomes the question of, it's not, I don't think it's a question. He's regressed in how he's looked since he started for the Steelers. Because when he came out in that Jets game, and I warned that this could happen. I warned that with him coming in and the pace of the NFL game, and a lot of people, I mean, people were in the stadium chanting, Kenny, Kenny. And I'm like, there's excitement there. You want to see how the young kid does. But this was what I was worried about, was that the pace of the NFL is really rough for rookies, and especially for rookie quarterbacks when they're not in an established offense that has an identity. And the Steelers don't have an established offensive identity. But when I was looking more and more at how that game was playing out, I was like, oh my goodness. In the All-22, like he's locking onto his receivers. He's not processing what the defense is giving him. I think he's making some pre-snap reads here and there. But he's making pre-snap reads, but once the defense goes, he's not adjusting to what they're doing. He's looking at his receivers. And this is only natural with a rookie quarterback. I also want to say this because a lot of people snapped at me when I was pointing this out on Twitter. They're saying, oh, you're saying that he stinks. No, I'm not saying that Kenny Pickett stinks. I am giving a realistic evaluation. I think it's important for Steelers fans, even if you're the biggest Kenny Pickett fan. If you're a Pitt grad, I am. If you're a Pitt grad and you loved Kenny Pickett at Pitt and you love the Steelers and you want to see him succeed for your favorite pro team like he succeeded for your favorite college team, you have to also acknowledge, if you want to see his actual growth, if you want to be real with how Kenny Pickett's career goes, you have to acknowledge where his faults are. And right now, his faults are seeing the field and executing what's in front of him, just like it was for Mitch Trubisky. A lot of Steelers fans were okay saying about Mitch Trubisky, and there were some people that were saying, don't criticize Mitch Trubisky. Yeah. But just like how I was saying, hey, we got to take the good with the bad with Mitch Trubisky, you got to take the good with the bad with Kenny Pickett. And in this last game, there was a lot of bad. And again, that doesn't mean that he can't grow from it. He's a rookie in the NFL, in an offense that doesn't have a really good offensive line, doesn't have a good offensive line. Right now, I'd say that his offensive line is below average. I wouldn't say they're failing. It's not like they're getting an F on the season, but they're below average for sure. Najee Harris can't get going because the offense that every defense they play is just running up to go get him, and there are times that he's dancing too much when he gets the ball in his hands. But he's not the biggest problem with the Steelers run game. It's the fact that teams are flying up to the line of scrimmage anytime that there's a chance he could get the ball. And when he's not in there, they're like, okay, we're worried about the other guys, and that's when Jaylen Warren succeeds, when it's a draw play and no one's looking for him coming. But then even with the Steelers' talented receivers and tight ends, there's no identity to get them the ball. And when the quarterback can't see the field, their playmaking ability is moot. And so now you have Kenny Pickett in a situation where he kind of has to be the engine that makes it go. And he doesn't have to be an elite quarterback, but he has to take what's there. And when teams are throwing out different defenses at you, and every week you're working on your game, but you're also studying how a defense is approaching you, and the whole time they're analyzing every single snap that you're on the field, it's not easy to do that, which is why I've been saying for a while, just changing out Matt Canada and slapping in Mike Sullivan at OC, all it's going to do is further complicate the process for Kenny Pickett, and it's not going to get you the results that you think. I promise you that right now. And again, and I'm not here to say that they should just keep Matt Canada and he's some genius. I don't think that at all. I'm totally fine if the Steelers let him go after the season, but I think if they did it right now, you're asking Kenny Pickett to get adjusted to a new play caller, and a new play caller who doesn't have a good record as a play. In fact, has a very bad record as a play caller. And again, when I look at the All-22, the play calls themselves aren't the problem. There are open guys. The concepts are getting people into space, are getting matchups that you want. Kenny Pickett has to be able to make some of these plays. And Steelers fans, if you want to be realistic, because here's the thing is if you acknowledge where he's struggling with now, and then later he gets better, then you can actually take note of the progress. You can say, hey, I remember when I was watching these podcasts with Chris, or I was looking at the All-22 and saying, like, man, he can't read that. And the next time he sees that seam down the middle of a cover two, that he hits it, and you're like, you know what? Kenny's figuring it out. Or we can blame it on things that we don't have any tangible proof of, any evidence in front of us of. And then whenever Kenny Pickett does click, you don't know why it clicked. You don't know how he clicked. You just say, oh, yeah, well, he's better now. That's what we try to do on this show. That's what I try to do with all of my work when I'm evaluating guys. I just wrote an article about the Pitt defense and how they need to take better attack angles when they're playing good offenses. It's how I operate in every sport that I cover and every team that I cover. And as a person, y'all remember how pro Kenny Pickett I was leading into this year, because I covered that man for 2 years at Pitt. And I think that he can develop into a real NFL star, and not Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes, but I think he could be in that tier right below them who gets it done. I think he can be like kind of what Jalen Hurts is right now for the Eagles. But if he's going to get there, he has to take real steps, and it's okay to acknowledge what real steps he has to take in the offense. But of course, he was not the only one who was struggling on Sunday against the Eagles. We'll talk more about all those different players in just a minute here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. But first, we got to talk to you about our friends at PrizePicks. PrizePicks, of course, the daily fantasy game that everyone needs to start playing right now. If you're big into fantasy sports, this is a way to get your daily fix by selecting individual players' projections and making just a simple decision whether they'll get more or less of what PrizePicks has set for their stats for that day. And it's easy. You're just picking 2 to 5 players that you think you have a beat on in fantasy and choose whether they'll get more or less than a certain stat, whether it's touchdowns, yards, gains, or if you're an NBA fan or an NHL fan, maybe it's shots on goal, maybe it's points scored, maybe it's defensive blocks. Who knows? PrizePicks has so many different contests that you could jump into all these different options across all the different sports, and you can win up to 10 times your money on any entry. You're not competing against others. This is just guessing right or wrong on whether it's more or less than the pick that PrizePicks has set. And again, this is NFL, NBA, Major League Baseball, NHL, college sports, and all so much more. Download the PrizePicks app or go to prizepicks.com to sign up to play daily fantasy sports. First-time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with promo code Locked On. That's LOCKEDON, Locked On. Again, deposit $100, you get $100 just by using Locked On PrizePicks.com, where you can make that money playing daily fantasy. Back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, I'm your host, Chris Carter. We're continuing rolling here. Before we get into all the other grades here, I just want to re-emphasize, I am not trying to say that Kenny Pickett stinks by any means. I think you could say that he stunk in that game, and I think there's a few games you could say that he hasn't. But I'm not here to say that he can't grow from it, because I see a lot of fans that they want to believe in Kenny Pickett, and they want to believe, in they want to believe in the Steelers, and they want to believe that the Steelers have their franchise quarterback. But ignoring what's in front of you, ignoring the film evidence that is there and what's available to you, I think that does yourself a disservice. I think it does the space of Steelers Twitter, Steelers fans, when we're all talking with people, when you're reading content on the Pittsburgh Steelers. I think it does everyone a disservice when you don't acknowledge that. So that being said, I do think it's important that we keep moving forward with the mind of it's okay to say when people mess up, especially if it's the player that you like. But like I said, we got to get to grades, because Kenny Pickett wasn't the only one who struggled in this game. For all the viewers out there and listeners out there, we're going to go back to how we grade things on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Remember, we don't do A, B, C's, D's, or nothing like that. We use stars and skulls, and in the sense that if you get 3 stars, you had an elite performance that's like all pro worthy of a day. If you get 2 stars, you had a great play with a good day to go behind it. If you use 1 star, you had a good play, and like that was pretty much it, but we weren't able to notice you having any other bad moments. But In reverse, if you're getting skulls, those of course are bad. One skull means you had a bad play when you never really had any redemption for it. Two skulls means you had a bad game as a whole, where you had several bad plays and they were costly to the team. Three skulls means you were all-time terrible. You should have been benched, or you were benched, and you could probably guess which of those guys, which guy is definitely on that list if you paid really close attention to the Steelers this week. So there's your rubric. I hope people remember that for moving forward. We're going to start with the good, because I feel like it's easier to talk about the bad in this situation. So let's get the good out of the way, because there were some guys. Now, there were no 3-star players. There was no 2-star players, but there were a handful of 1-star players based off of the limited things that they were able to do in this game. Cam Hayward still being Cam Hayward, fighting his way in, keeping things going. Cam Sutton, I thought, had a really good, really good game. In the first quarter, they tried going after him. It didn't work. They then went to Ahkello Witherspoon. That did work. And that's why they never really went back after him. But he was targeted 3 times, allowed 1 reception for 14 yards, but had a breakup on a play. They really didn't go back after him. He also had 2 stops against the run. Good job on Cam Sutton's part. Carlos Davis got his first sack. That was kind of cool. I meant to take off Chris Boswell. I apologize for him being here on the screen. But Nick Skiba, the kicker that took his place, he got the star. So he's off there. Alex Highsmith, even though Alex Highsmith didn't put up really any crazy numbers, he had 3 tackles in this game. He also had 3 hurries, and he was a big part of being able to force Jalen Hurts to move the few times the Steelers did. So I gave him a little bit of credit for that. Derek Watt for catching a touchdown pass, because I guess he played 3 snaps and he caught a touchdown. You got to give that to him. Pat Freiermuth, when he was given opportunities to make plays, I think that he did a decent job out there. Jaylen Warren had some hard runs I thought were typical of Jaylen Warren. There were a couple plays where he ran right into the smack dab of the line, because that's what happens when you're not running a draw play that no one's looking for. But again, I thought he ran hard. James Pierre, I didn't think had a chance to really show everything he had in this game, but the Eagles were feasting on Ahkello Witherspoon this game. We'll get to him in just a bit here. But when James Pierre went in, and I know that somewhere Tony Serino is jumping for joy because he started the James Pierre train way back 2 years ago. But he was targeted 3 times, allowed 1 catch for 10 yards. And, one of those included really good coverage against AJ Brown. So really good stuff there from James Pierre. Chase Claypool, he threw that touchdown, but he also had a really nice catch where he drove forward. I do think Chase Claypool has grown up a bit for the Steelers. He still makes mistakes here and there, but he's a better receiver and he's a better player, and he's finding any which way he can contribute. So good on him for that. Also, got to say, Steven Sims had a 27-yard return. And he was getting open. He didn't get really much of a chance to do anything in the Steelers offense just because of not getting targeted enough in this game. He was targeted 3 times for 2 catches, only had -1 yard. So that was more about the play around him than the play himself. But when he was in the return game, he was making it happen. So there's your 1-star guys. Your 1 skull guys, and again, we'll get to the worst of the worst in a bit. Now, your 1 skull guys, also a large group of people here. Now, I say Minkah Fitzpatrick on the 1 skull list simply because that interception was the missed interception was too costly. And I will say this: if you're probably thinking, well, Chris, why doesn't he have more skulls? That was a pretty bad play. Well, like I said, 1 skull is for when you have a bad play, you never make up for it. If you had to guess how many more times he was targeted during the game, how many times would you say? If you said anything other than 0, you were incorrect, because he was never thrown at again in the game, and that's a big part of it. And really, there was another time that he was in the area when he was thrown at, and he still found a way to get his hand on the ball when he wasn't the defensive back that was really being targeted. He was coming over to help, because that's normally what he does. So Minkah Fitzpatrick, nothing really redeeming. The touchdown he gave up, he said afterwards, that's a play that he's paid to make. And he knows it, but that's why he gets one skull, not anything else. Kevin Dotson, I admit, I thought Kevin Dotson had a terrible game. When I look back, it wasn't as terrible as I thought, especially considering he was going up against Javon Hargrave for much of that. Javon Hargrave would eat most people's lunches, and when he played for the Steelers, he ate the lunches of like first round draft picks pretty consistently on the inside. And when I look back, I was like, you know what? Kevin Dotson didn't have this really bad game than I thought he did. He actually hung in there a bit more, and he was, not the weakest link of the Steelers offensive line. We'll get to who those were in a minute. Presley Harvin, I put one skull on him because he had a couple early ones that I thought were good, and then he once again became inconsistent, averaged 45 yards on the day. I think that just unfortunately might be who he is at this point. Terrell Edmonds, at first I thought Terrell had a better day than what I originally just by going back over the initial plays. But when you look at the fact that he was targeted a bunch, he did blow the touchdown. The last touchdown that they threw to Zach Pascal. I don't put the Minkah touchdown on him because his job is to lead that guy into Minkah Fitzpatrick, and that's not a play that he's responsible for. He did have a breakup on the day that I thought was really good, but in general, Terrell Edmonds needed to be better. That's why, but he got one skull because they didn't pick on him too much. Robert Spillane wasn't in there a ton. Was in there for 26 snaps. Had 3 tackles and only gave up 1 reception, but there were some times I felt like he was out of position, and that kind of hurt them especially when Jalen Hurts was running. Chukuma Okorafor, I give him one skull because I thought that he was like Dotson. He wasn't as bad as I thought initially, but he still made enough mistakes to earn a skull. Arthur Mollett, he's not as contributing as much as you hope. There's some times where I think that he needs to be an aggressor out the slot to help against the run or help against a guy like Jalen Hurts. He's not doing that enough. I actually meant to put Mason Cole on the next list, so I apologize for that, for not editing that down. Zach Gentry, though, definitely earned a 1 skull. Didn't make enough plays in this one. There was times when he was blocking and he was getting beat. He needed to show up in that regard. James Daniels, not an overwhelmingly terrible performance, but just not a good one either. And there was enough times that he got beat that he earned the list. And Montravius Adams as well, just for what he was putting together on the list. Those are the 1 skulls and the 1 stars on this show. We're gonna get to the 2 skulls and the 3 skulls in a minute because there's some things and commentary from other football players about one of the guys that got 2 or 3 skulls that I want to get to right here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. So don't go anywhere. We'll get to those guys in just a minute and show you some stuff that happened that I found interacting with me on social media on Twitter account. But before we get to anything about that, we got to talk to you guys about our friends at betonline.net. BetOnline is your #1 source for all your betting stats and sports information. Find all the latest sports developments, league reviews, and news, including this year's Major League Baseball World Series, which is concluding right now. Not concluding right now, but the World Series is going on. So go get your chance to make some money on the World Series. And it's the awesome time of the year where football, baseball, basketball, hockey is all in action, and you can make all the money that you can and learn about all the different ways you can make money at BetOnline, your continued source for all your sports wagering information, from live betting to playoffs, esports, and more. Head to the website today. Use your mobile device to learn more about the trends in the action when you visit BetOnline, where the game starts. Back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, I'm your host, Chris Carter, continuing our run through our Week 8 grades of our stars and skulls. Now, we've done our 1 star, we've done our 1 skull. There are no 2 stars or 3-star players from that game. It was that bad. But let's go to the 2 skulls because there were more than usual. And remember, 2 skulls means you had like a really bad day. It wasn't just a play or 2 you gave up. You was getting whooped. And the main 2 skulls here, I'll lead with the fact that Kenny Pickett is on this list. And I say this because Kenny Pickett, I didn't think he had the worst game of all time or anything like that, but this was a bad game from Kenny Pickett. And arguably this was his worst game. He didn't throw, 4 interceptions or anything like that. Like, that's when I put a quarterback in that conversation, when you are making those type of mistakes. But there were also several times where Kenny Pickett was making decent throws. He finished 25 of 38 for 191 yards. And I acknowledge that it's tough for him in this position to make, to kind of put a team on his back. And this is why I said with Monday's episode, I think they're asking too much of him. But even in the asking too much of him, if he just takes the reasonable throw that's there, the easier throws, the Steelers offense would have scored. And one thing I did forget until someone reminded me this, was actually my old man. He just we were texting about this about the game, and he was like, Chris, when he threw that interception in the end zone, if he hits the open man, it's a 1-score game in the fourth quarter. And I was like, you're right. I completely forgot about that because like I'm thinking like they lost 35-13. They were never in this game. And I'm like, well, actually, yeah, if he does throw that, it's a 1-score game. Granted, the Eagles probably score in the next possession and it wouldn't have mattered, but it was that's a lot closer than it felt like, right? It's kind of crazy to think that. But again, Kenny Pickett, he can grow and learn. I've talked enough about him. Now, the other 3 guys who earned 2 skulls there, and we'll get to our 3 skull in a minute here. Dan Moore Jr., he's getting whipped enough. And I think that this year, the experiment of Dan Moore Jr. as your left tackle, your blindside protector, I think it needs to be done. He might be a better right tackle someday. He might even be a better guard someday. I think because he's really physical when you let him be downhill, but when he has to be passive, when he has to go in pass pro, it's not great. And it's rough there. Miles Jack, and crazy enough, when I looked at this, at the targeted numbers on Pro Football Focus, and then I compared it to the All-22, Miles Jack did have a rough one. He was targeted 5 times by Jalen Hurts, gave up 4 receptions for 78 yards, and 46 yards after the catch. That was pretty rough. Devin Bush, on the other hand, the one thing I will say, I didn't give Devin Bush any stars because he only had 1 tackle in the game. But at the same time, he was also never targeted. And I think that's impressive, the fact that he wasn't someone that they picked on. But Miles Jack was the guy they picked on, and you come to expect Miles Jack to do more than that. Sure, he had a few tackles in this game, but all in all, I felt that that he was a bigger letdown than I initially thought, just by looking at my first run through of the film. When you saw the All-22, there were a lot of times he was out of position. He missed a tackle in this game. It was really rough. All in all, I just think that he has to, that he is better than that. I think he will be better than that, but this was a rough game for him. And then Mason Cole, I think part of this is also on Mason Cole, because if he's the center, he has to help everyone else. And I get that he's a bridge guy and he's not the answer long-term at center, but like there's a lot of communication breakdowns, and I think some of that falls down on him. But also just him individually just getting whipped a lot up front. Again, Kevin Dotson to me fought back more than he did. And that's not to say Mason Cole stinks forever, but man, that was a rough one. So there are your 2 skull guys. Now your 3 skull guys, or I should say guy, and you know who it is. I don't got to sugarcoat it. It's Ahkello Witherspoon, because Ahkello Witherspoon in this game was targeted 9 times. The Eagles just kept going after him, allowed 7 catches for 73 yards and 2 touchdowns. I don't know how else to say this. He was abysmal. They went right after him. And I know that A.J. Brown is a tough matchup for anybody, but you gotta show the fight back. And the Steelers benching him was kind of like, I think it was an acknowledgement, like he's not showing that fight back. And you put in James Pierre, and he got you answers. But Ahkello Witherspoon, and again, I hope he finds a way to pick himself up after this, because I do see potential in him sometimes, but he's been wildly inconsistent. It's what people who covered him at the Niners and the Seahawks said. But Ahkello Witherspoon was so bad, when I tweeted during the game, like, well, there's James Pierre on A.J. Brown, that means Ahkello Witherspoon is benched, and James Pierre actually covered him. That sucks. There was a person who retweeted it and quote tweeted it, not even just retweeted, quote tweeted and gave their own commentary saying it's obvious 42 needs to be on that field. Now, if you're not a Pitt fan, you don't know who this person is, but that's Marquez Williams. He's a starting quarterback for the Pitt Panthers. So we got college players at the same training facility, seeing how bad it is for Ahkello Witherspoon and seeing that James Pierre is playing. Now, I will say this, James Pierre has been around a few years for the Steelers, so it's very possible that he's made a good impression with, maybe some of the Pitt players that are around and anything like that. And it may be possible that Marquez looks up to James Pierre. But dang, like Marquez ain't from Pittsburgh. He ain't like, it's not like he grew up, but it's not like he grew up a Yinzer Steelers fan and he's been rooting for them every day of his life. He's seeing that Ahkello Witherspoon is just getting toasted, and he was able to point out that James Pierre needs to be on the field. And I think that's I think the Steelers, you give a veteran a chance to recover, you give him a chance to fight back. And Ahkello Witherspoon also coming off an injury, and maybe he's not 100%. But if he don't bounce back soon, I think you got to keep James Pierre in there. And and I'll say this too, James Pierre, this is his second or third week in a row where I've given him a positive. I think this is the third week in a row I give him a star performance because of his positive contributions to the Steelers, whether they win or lose. So maybe James Pierre's back. A lot of people were crowning him. I know Tony Serino on this very show. Don't worry, we will also have Tony back at some points very soon. He's just a busy guy, and so am I. But maybe Tony was right, and it was just that the James Pierre hype train was being built a little too early, and then now it's finally in the station, and it's time to hop on. I don't know, but I do know Ahkello Witherspoon, big part of the struggles. And I think the Steelers, they got a time in this bye week to kind of figure some things out, make some adjustments, find out who's going to step up in the right positions. I think that's a big part of what they're doing right now. I don't expect any huge moves to be made. The Ravens made a huge move for Roquan Smith, and that's a huge move. 7th and 5th round picks there. Now, I will say this too. A lot of people are saying, well, why didn't the Steelers make that move? It's because what have we been talking about how the Steelers need to do right now? And what the Steelers need to do right now is find young talent that they're going to be able to build around. And I don't think investing in another linebacker right now is exactly what they're looking for at the moment. If they gave up a 2nd and a 5th round pick, they'd severely limit this upcoming draft class that needs to be chock full of young talent that's going to be implemented offense, defense, but especially in the trenches on the lines, and maybe also the cornerback position, maybe the edge rushers, whoever. I don't think the Steelers are as much in a buy mode as y'all think. Is being in buy mode means that you're feeling like you're ready to win the Super Bowl, or that you need a boost so that you can be in the contention with those who are ready to win the Super Bowl. Steelers are 2-6. They're not that. So relax. For all the people that are like, why didn't the Steelers do this? There's a reason. But there's lots more to still talk about. I've only gone over the All-22 once before doing this because it's limited times. It's doing this on a Monday for the Tuesday episode. We'll do more of that. We'll have other guests coming in throughout the week. We're also going to do a mailbag episode for Thursday's episode. So, for those out there who remember when we used to do those, we do call-ins for our mailbags. You can call 412-223-6644. Again, that's 412-223-6644. Leave a voicemail with your name and where you're from. Keep it to less than a minute. Try to keep it to 30 seconds if possible, because we're trying to get as many as we can in, and we'll try to answer your questions right here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm Chris Carter, your host. Follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Carter Critiques. Read my work at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, where I cover Pitt athletics, and keep checking out the Locked On Steelers podcast on Apple, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Odyssey, and YouTube. If you're enjoying the YouTube show, like the video if you're seeing it here. Subscribe to the YouTube channel to get all of our daily Monday through Friday episodes. I'll be back on Wednesday with more on your Pittsburgh Steelers right here on Locked On Steelers podcast.